Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom on the program tonight. It's a huge day for civil aviation in India, with air bubbles, which had come into effect during the pandemic, having been replaced now with full-fledged flights across destinations around the world. In other words, normal overseas operations like it used to be before COVID affected us. Now, the aviation industry in India, which was battered by the pandemic, sees this as a sign of hope. And for passengers, there's the expectation that there will be much, much cheaper airfares. Will that actually happen? Now, in simple terms, as many as 60 airlines from 40 countries have been permitted to operate 1,783 flight frequencies to and from India during the summer schedule, which the government has announced. This means that India will be back to being connected with the world with more airlines, more destinations than we've seen in years. It is a return to normalcy. It is absolutely huge for the aviation industry as well, which is why we have a fantastic panel tonight. Sanjeev Kapoor, the incoming CEO of Jet, joins us. Willie Bolter, the Chief Commercial Officer of Indigo. Rajesh Mago, the co-founder of Make My Trip. Alok Bajpai, the co-founder of Ixigo. They're all with us. But first, let me go across to our panel on aviation this evening. Let me go straight across now to Sanjeev Kapoor. Thanks very much, Mr. Kapoor, for being with us. I think the most obvious question, which any number of viewers watching this program will want to know, after fairly high airfares, particularly on international destinations, for the last couple of years, will airfares likely now come down?
Well, every time capacity is increased, airfares do head downwards. The only complicating factor this time is the war in Ukraine, which is obviously resulting in oil prices spiking. ATF rates have really gone through the roof. But everything all said and done, if we did not increase capacity, airfares would have been even higher. So increasing capacity will moderate the airfares and help them stay within a certain band, which would not be achievable if we hadn't done this.
Mr. Mago, do you believe that this is going to have a knock-on effect, not just on aviation and aviation companies, but also, for example, on hospitality and tourism?
Yeah, Vishnu, I guess this is obviously a great news. Moving away from air bubbles, now the scheduled flights opening up with, as many number of flights as you mentioned, clearly bring this supply back. And that's welcome news, especially at the time when the consumer sentiment is very, very positive right now. In fact, in our recent survey, it was all-time high in terms of people wanting to travel. And COVID restrictions are not there, as we know, in many countries now. So all these are all positive, news that's coming through. But as Sanjeev was pointing out, I'll just to sort of substantiate that further, we'll give you some, the recent data point, right? This news came about a week, 10 days ago that, the scheduled flights are going to get open, and the system started showing all those flights already. And the bookings had started to happen. So the good news was that the bookings actually went up month on month 40%. Yep. But the fares hadn't really gone down.
Right.
Fares,
Why not?
As compared to I'll tell you in a second. But just to complete the data point that I was going to share, if you compare that with the January 20 numbers from fares, whether it is 0 to 15 days advance purchase or more than 15 days advance purchase, in the range of 25-30%, still higher than as compared to January 20, right? And now the reason why they haven't really come back is only because of the fuel. As we all know, that the fuel prices are about 40% of the operating cost of all the airlines. And unfortunately, that has been the bummer. While all other news is very, very positive, but this bummer continues. And therefore, it becomes a bit of a challenge for airlines to be able to, balance between, the fares and their operating costs. Right? So that's really the reason right now. But having said that, the amount of capacity that is coming back, right, as it opens up more and more and the demand sentiment sort of picks up, I do hope that the fares are going to come down.
To stabilize. Okay, Rajesh, just one sec. I want to go across to Willie Bolter, the Chief Commercial Officer of Indigo. Thanks, Mr. Bolter, very much for being with us. Now, you've immediately introduced all your flights, press releases, thousands of flights, in fact, all over the world in your new schedule. For your airline, for Indigo, does this mean that passengers are going to benefit despite oscillating fuel prices?
Well, I mean, as you say, we've introduced our flights again. I mean, with the change of the IATA system, season rather, on today, and we will be operating about 150 flights a day. Yeah. Our peak, just to let you know, was 162 during the COVID period. We're obviously looking forward to getting back to our regular international schedule, operating as we did to about 23 points, I think it was, before COVID. So we're going back to 15 in the meantime, and we're very much hoping that the market will respond and that we'll have good load factors.
Mr. Bolter, how important is it for Indigo to actually have these COVID restrictions lifted at this stage? Because the aviation industry in India has really taken a hit. Now, I know Indigo was somewhat insulated because of your strong financials, but how important is it for you, for example, to go forward with your own growth now that you can fly wherever it is that you want to fly?
Well, we were focused on growing our international business, and before COVID, international made up around 25% of our capacity, our available seat kilometers, as we call them, in the airline business. And we were, quite content with that. But as Rono Datta, our CEO, has said subsequently, we'd like to grow that towards sort of 30 or even more % as we go forward. But right now, we're focused on returning the international business to around 25% of our total system.
Right. Alok Bajpai, this is something which a lot of people don't realize. We are sitting over here talking about a resurgence in international travel from India, international aviation from India. But there are several countries in Europe which actually require a booster shot. We don't give a booster shot here in India. For example, and this is a very real case, I had COVID a couple of weeks back. Had I not had COVID a couple of weeks back, I would not have been able to travel to any number of European countries because my second vaccine is almost 1 year back. Then what happens? I would have to travel to a third country to get a booster shot? It doesn't make sense, does it?
Well, yes, I think there is still a lot of variance in the norms for allowing entry to travelers. And you mentioned the booster shot. The other confusion that's still out there is certain countries not accepting Covaxin. Right. Significant percentage of our population has been vaccinated with Covaxin. And I think, however, what we've seen is that progressively countries have changed their stance on this. And we saw this in Europe. I think barring Germany, most of the countries started accepting Covaxin, for example, as an acceptable vaccination.
And it's now listed in the WHO. So that shouldn't be a problem.
Absolutely. And I think from a booster shot perspective, we understand that there are some discussions happening, at the government level. But I think there's also the fact that, a very large majority of our vaccinations have happened in the last 6 months, right? Like if you look at the absolute numbers. So I think there will be a smaller proportion of people who will be impacted by that 9-month regulation based on the numbers we've seen. And like Rajesh was saying that, the demand is coming back very, very strongly, right? So we've also seen like a 40% sort of month-on-month increase in searches. But the dampener here really is, the fares, right? And though there was an expectation that fares would trend down as soon as capacity grew, but because of the Russia-Ukraine crisis and, oil prices, we are still sitting on a very high, like 25 to 30% higher fares in many routes. Even on domestic, by the way, right? So domestic is still not back to pre-COVID levels,
right,
despite the interest being there.
Right. Sanjeev, the civil aviation minister had a really interesting point to make. He said that it's important to connect the world to India, India with the world, by focusing on large-scale acquisitions in our airlines of wide-body aircraft flying long-haul routes or ultra-long-haul routes. Now, that's something which you, as the incoming CEO of Jet, would be looking at. Do you believe that that's really the next stage of Indian aviation when we are talking about, airlines like Jet restarting, or even Air India trying to establish itself, that, non-stop, long haul, is that the future which is going to give Indian customers also, besides anybody else, a lot more choice?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I think the demand for non-stop flights has gone up significantly and will stay up. As far as Indian carriers are concerned, I think we need to claw back a fair share of the India inbound and outbound traffic. Wide-body operations is not cheap, it's very expensive. For wide-body operations to work effectively, we need to have a good hub-and-spoke system, a good feeder and hub airport system in India. Unfortunately, our major airports are still not ideally set up to be good international hub connectors. Certain regulations need to change. The layout of airports need to be modified. Some of our airports, the domestic and international terminals are separate, etc. We don't yet have a mega hub kind of an airport in India like you have in Dubai and Singapore and elsewhere. So that is going to be a constraint. But all else being equal, India certainly needs to carry more of its own customers or traffic in and out of the country. We need to get more wide-body aircraft. We need to, punch our weight, which we have not been doing for a while. But the supporting infrastructure has to allow us to do that, and hopefully, with all the measures and moves and initiatives being taken, the airport constraints will also be addressed. For example, India is one of the few countries in the world where for connecting passengers, even if you're connecting from a domestic to another domestic flight, you have to go through security again.
Right.
Which is not the case anywhere else in the world. And that makes our ability to connect passengers with lower connection times much more difficult. These are all unnatural constraints on creating true hubs. So we need to remove these constraints, build more integrated terminals, and allow us to compete on a level playing field with the hub airports of other regions. And we're not quite there yet.
Sanjeev, we've got your name designation over there, incoming CEO of Jet. People are watching that, and people would be really wanting to know, and I have to ask you this. Are you optimistic of getting Jet to soar where it once was in a finite period of time? Because you're the man in charge now in terms of the financial recovery of the airline. It is an awesome responsibility. There have been very few successful rebounds in Indian civil aviation, and you're sitting in the middle of a story of hope. So is that a genuine sense of hope that you have?
Absolutely. I would not have taken this challenge if I wasn't convinced that the promoters and investors in the new Jet, in Jet 2.0, are serious, committed, and have the funds. I'm convinced that of the commitment, of the sincerity, of the ability to fund this. I'm very impressed by the fact that they're building a professional management team, which again is very reassuring to me, from the CFO to myself to various other senior appointees. We are all industry professionals, and we are all going to give it our best. I'm hopeful. I would not have taken this challenge if I didn't think that we couldn't get this done. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not like within weeks Jet is going to go back to the size, scale, and network that it used to have. But we will get there. Step by step, we will get there, and we're committed to that.
Could you give us some timelines for that, Sanjeev?
Well, we hope to get started in the second half of this year,
right.
And we hope to scale up fairly quickly. We need to make sure that we don't, have the expression, the tail can't wag the dog. We need to make sure that we get the right aircraft in the right configuration, etc., and we plan accordingly, and we don't just become too tactical in grabbing whatever's out there. So those kind of constraints will have to be looked at as well. But I can tell you that we're very committed. We've got a solid business plan, and we're going to just be, people have to be patient. We know there's a lot of people waiting for the old Jet to come back, and we are committed to making Jet the loved airline that it was before, but we just ask for people's patience until we get there.
Rajesh, there's going to be Akasa, there is a new Air India, there's a new Jet, and Indigo just keeps growing among other airlines as well. SpiceJet has got brand new MAX 8 aircraft. Is the consumer very much the king in the Indian market space?
I think so, Vishnu. I mean, if you really see or take a step back, industry sometime back, pre-COVID was sort of stabilizing, and then the COVID happened, and the last 2 years have been probably the toughest in the history of civil aviation for all the airlines and probably the entire travel tourism industry as well. But despite that, the kind of resilience shown by the existing players and the fact that the deal has happened between Air India and Tata's, and the fact that there are a couple of others who are looking at the long-term potential of the market are also coming into the market is clearly very positive news and very welcome. From a consumer point of view, it's definitely going to help because, there's going to be healthy competition. As I have seen many players in the past as well, and even today, they continue to take a very positive long-term view of the industry. Unfortunately, the disruptions have been happening, from macro standpoint every now and then, but we've seen the resilience as well. So I think it's going to be helpul from a consumer point of view. Things would stabilize. It's just a matter of, I guess, the airlines have also sort of proved, as they've been running it for many years, that it is not impossible to run an efficient and a profitable sort of airline. I mean, look at Indigo, like you rightly pointed out, they've been just growing the share as well. And with Sanjeev and look at Akasa, the ex-Jet team actually is coming and going to run. They're all very sort of seasoned professionals. They're going to be at the helm. I'm quite confident that, I think the entire industry needs some respite on macro, whether it's a war situation or it is a fuel situation, or we get ATF under the GST, which has been the long pending demand, as you know. You need some sort of macro respite, but the fundamental investments that are happening in the civil aviation infrastructure, whether it is expansion of airports or looking at various ways to make sure that we can continue to keep optimizing the cost of operations for the airlines.
Right.
I think that's all very, very positive and fundamental.
Okay. Willie Bolter, I must ask you, we've an entire generation of Indians has grown up to the A320 class of aircraft, single aisle aircraft, Indigo among other airlines, but you are using that platform in different avatars now going forward. You'll have the A321 XLR, and again, it's going to be a single aisle aircraft, but you're going to be flying it out to Europe eventually. Is that going to be comfortable for passengers?
Well, we think the XLR is actually, in some ways, a wide-body beta because it enables an airline to operate at very low seat mile cost on longer haul flights. And for us, yes, it will mean that we are able to access markets in Central and Western Europe, and also far in the East, Korea and West Japan and Taiwan and so on, and Northern China. So we're very excited about this aircraft, which is coming in hopefully in the first half 2024, and we will be making some product changes in order to assist passengers and make passengers comfortable on a longer haul sector. And we're very convinced that we can be very competitive with the aeroplane.
Yeah. Are you ever going to go wide body, Willie Bolter, on Indigo? Ever?
Well, they say never say never. But I think our focus right now is on the XLR, which is yet to fly, actually. The first example is not yet flying, but it's in production right now. And, we're very confident that the A321 XLR will be a great aeroplane for the future. Right.
Alok Bajpai, the knock-on effect from aviation to, say, hotels and tourism. And the reason I ask this is because they were as badly hit, hammered during COVID as the airlines themselves. So if the civil aviation sector has opened up in this manner, are we expected to see, better demand, better choices, better prices, and a more viable tourism sector in India?
Yeah, I think it's already happening. We had a very strong Holi, long weekend that we just saw last week. And I think any of the major tourist destinations if you wanted to find a good 4 or 5 star property, it was very hard to get a room. And even if you were lucky to get one, the prices were, at pre-COVID levels or even higher in some cases. And I think this May, June, the summer season really is going to be the strongest, that we would have seen, hopefully for a very long time, based on the demand that is shaping up. And we are already seeing, not just for international, but also for domestic people locking in, advance purchase of fares. And that's something else which was not happening during COVID. Most people were planning for the short term, next few days or a week. We are seeing that advance purchase window move to a 15, 30 day or beyond. And I think that's a very, that's good for the airlines, good for the industry, because it helps us plan our businesses better. But I believe that May, June, you will see, at least in domestic tourism, return to, very close to pre-COVID levels on at least the major destinations. International, like we discussed, depends a lot on the fares. The oil prices are going to determine the trajectory there.
Okay. Sanjeev, one final question to you. Quite apart from the routes or the flights and frequencies which have been announced, there are a whole new number of steps, to remove COVID regulations from, for example, our airports, some of them, and from aircraft as well, in terms of the number of seats, etc. Could you tell us what some of those are and how that is important for the viability of airlines or the airport experience, as it were?
Well, from the point of view of airlines, there are certain last remaining regulations that have now been removed, such as the crew having to wear PPE suits, etc., which are a cost for the airline. And frankly, I don't think they were required. They could have been removed a while ago. So it's good that they're being removed now. Much of the earlier COVID requirements had been removed, like the airlines were no longer giving shields and masks, etc., and sanitization kits out. There's very little left. The only regulation left regarding COVID in airports and airlines is the need to wear masks, which I think is a reasonably sensible approach to take, because masks don't cost that much, and why not have that one extra level of precaution?
Right.
But for practical purposes, in terms of the actual travel experience, almost all of the COVID restrictions have been removed. Of course, for international travel, there are additional requirements depending on where you're traveling to, etc. You still have to do testing in some cases. You need to be fully vaccinated, as we talked about. You need to be boosted in some cases. India no longer requires a test before people come into India, but you need to only if you're fully vaccinated. If you can prove you're fully vaccinated, you don't need to test. So a lot of constraints have been removed. So I think for all practical purposes, there's nothing holding air travel back really, other than fuel prices. And Vishnu, I just want to add one thing. You had asked about the very first question about India, the demand for wide bodies, and I had talked about how we need to get our fair share. One thing to note is that the fuel prices in India, regardless of how they are globally, are always higher. So we have the highest fuel prices in the world.
Yeah.
We are at a record level today for India, 110,000 rupees per kiloliter, 1.1 lakh per kiloliter. Airlines normally don't make money when fuel prices go over 65,000 rupees. We've almost doubled that.
Right.
And the tax regime is very high, and the cost of operating in India is high because of the kinds of regulations we have, the congested airports, etc. So we need to address a lot of that. Bring fuel under GST so that we no longer have 20-30% tax on fuel, but it comes down to 5%.
Sure.
And really address a lot of the cost side before Indian airlines can compete on a level playing field with the foreign carriers.
I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us. I suppose it's wonderful that air travel has opened up once again. It's going to offer our customers a great deal of choice, but making airlines profitable, once again, that remains a huge challenge for some of the reasons spelt out. Thank you all very much for being with us.